Hello, my name is David Ash, and over a series of posts I want to introduce you to my work by telling my story and singing my songs. Now, my story began at a very early age. I came to the door of light through physics, and my introduction to physics began when I was 5, 6, and 7. And the story I'm going to tell you was when I was 7. And the reason I'm telling you this story is because at that early age, I was introduced by my father not only to physics, but also to spiritual and psychic phenomena. And as this story unfolds, you'll realize why it is that I see no separation between science and spirituality, between physics and psychic phenomena. My father was a medical doctor. He had a practice in Harley Street, but also a practice in the West Country where we were living at the time. And he noticed that there were clusters of cancers in certain areas in the West Country, and his suspicion was that it was in some way due to people living above loads of uranium deep in the ground, and it was the radioactivity causing the cancer. And so, because he couldn't dig up people's houses, what he was doing is he was locating uranium loads in the West Country and then going back to the geological maps and looking at the geology where he discovered the uranium and comparing it to the geology of the houses where he was discovering the cancer clusters. And sure enough, he saw the correlation that there were more cancers in houses where people were living above uranium-bearing rock than in other parts of the county. So this story I'm going to tell you when I was 7 was a typical Saturday when my father would take us on uranium prospecting expeditions. Now, at that time, there were 6 children in our family, and we went off on this expedition with my elder sister Jenny and my elder brother Tim, myself, Simon, and also we had our cousin Andrew on this occasion, who was with us, and as well as Simon and Andrew, we had Stephen, and Stephen was a toddler. He was only a young chap, but he was on his pins, and if you could walk, then you were old enough to come prospecting for uranium. So off we went like the 7 dwarfs. Mary, she was a tiny babe in arms, so she wasn't old enough to come because she could only crawl. So we had this old Rolls Royce. My father had bought this Rolls Royce for £10 from a farmer who'd kept chickens in the back. And so the back was in a bit of a derelict state. So my father, got all the muck and that out. And because there were no back seats in this Rolls-Royce chicken coop, my father nailed an old sofa into the back. And so that's where we all went, all us youngsters, Jenny and myself and Simon, Andrew and Stephen were piled into the back. We never had seat belts in those days. And the pickaxes, shovels and Geiger counter were all put in the back behind that sofa. And Tim, the eldest eldest son, he sat next to my father in the passenger seat because Tim's job was to dowse. What my father did is he gave Tim a little lump of uranium ore, and Tim held the lump of uranium ore in one hand and he scanned the horizon with the other. And in this way, he was dowsing for the uranium. And what we were doing is we would actually locate uranium from 20 to 30 miles away from where we were living in Poffel near Bude. And on this particular day, we found our way onto Bodmin Moor to a place called Bray Down. Because what happened is that at each junction, we would follow the tingling sensation. And when we got onto the moor on this road, Tim suddenly began to cry because the tingling had turned to a painful prickle. And that's when my father stopped and he rolled the roller over to the roadside and bundled us all out and got out the Geiger counter. And he started scanning around, and the Geiger counter was going ballistic over the middle of the road. And he'd let each of us put on the headphones and take it in turns to listen to the clicking. It was all terribly exciting. You can imagine when you were little, sort of listening to radioactivity in the ground. It was a thrilling experience. Anyway, we started digging up the road because in those days, the roads across Bodmin Moor weren't tarmac. They were dirt roads and easy for the Seven Dwarfs to dig up. So we got at it with the picks and shovels and started digging up the road. Fairly soon into the dig, I went and hit my thumb with a pickaxe. And so I was in a very sorry state. I was only 7 and I was weeping and wailing. So Jenny took me and put me into the back of the car and was nursing me. And then, of course, while she was focusing on me, Stephen went off and toddling on his own and fell into a stream. So Jenny had to run out and rescue Stephen and bring him back. And so he was howling as well because he was wet. So there were 2 of us howling in the back of the car. Meanwhile, Simon and Andrew had gone off with a Geiger counter to do a bit of prospecting on their own. And they went up to an old copper working and they did in fact find some more uranium. They got lots more clicking. But Tim was the only dwarf left with my dad, and the 2 of them were digging away in the road, and eventually they found a lump of granite, and in the granite were these black veins of what my father recognized to be 10% uranium oxide. So anyway, he started smashing up this lump of granite, and by then I'd got over my thumb. It wasn't hurting so much, so I came out and joined the others. And meanwhile, Stephen was dry, and so he came and joined in as well, and Jenny. And Simon and Andrew had finished their prospecting, and we all crowded round this smashed up piece of granite, and we were picking out the little black bits. I remember picking them out and putting them in the sack. And my father would send these samples off to Cambridge University for analysis, and he'd send the Hessian sacks of the uranium ore in sacks in the guards compartment. And people would often, if the train was crowded, they'd sit in the guards compartment on the sacks. So people would be getting, radioactivity, radiation up their bums. In those days, you never put a sign of radioactive material on the sacks or anything like that. It was all no one was bothered, it was all rather primitive. But anyway, the main thing is that I learnt in those days that, of the importance of working with dowsing, working with these psychic faculties as well as with Geiger counters and the physics. And over the years, I learnt about physics. My father introduced me to Einstein and Rutherford. He had a scintillation counter. He had Geiger counters. He had all this exciting and extraordinary apparatus. He was on the front line of radioactivity research and introduced me. He'd share, the physics with me. So I was brought up with a love of this subject. And 10 years later, well, it's 9 years later, when I was 16, I made a momentous discovery in a book on yogic philosophy. I believe I stumbled across the key to the universe. And because I had 9 years of knowledge and experience in physics under my belt by the time I got to 16, 9 to 10 years, I recognized the enormous importance of this discovery that I made in the book, this book on yoga, this ancient yogic philosophy. So I'm going to tell you all about that in the next post. It's very exciting. And I'm going to finish this discourse with a song. This song is called Listen, and it's a song I wrote in Cornwall in my early 20s. Listen, oh listen, you must just stop and listen. Listen to this song as it weaves and it flows, a little stream it tumbles to the sea of stillness, of peace and stillness. Listen, oh listen, you must just stop and listen. Listen for the wind, the rustling leaves, whispering softly from the world of stillness, of peace and stillness. Listen, oh listen, you must just stop and listen. Listen for the music of a grasshopper's bow, playing its song from the world of stillness, of peace and stillness. Listen, oh listen, you must learn to stop and listen. Listen and let life pass you on by. For a moment, just linger, drifting into dreams of stillness, of calm stillness and Thank you for listening.